and showcase small businesses, both in the Metro Detroit area and lately around the country. So that's fun. I'm hoping to add a few in from some other places as well. So if you are watching now or later, please put in the comments where you're watching from, and we'll either answer them live on this podcast, or we will get back to later. We're pretty good at that. So this morning, it is my pleasure to introduce Wendy Rose Bice, who I've known for a number of years, in all transparency. And we work kind of in similar but different segments of helping and communications. So Wendy, good morning, first of all.
Good morning.
Or good afternoon, depending on when you're watching this.
And or good evening.
Good evening, or if you're like me at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. So Wendy has an interesting story of how she kind of got where she is that she's going to share with us today, and talk about branding and vision, really the vision that nonprofits should create for their organization, both short, medium, and long-term goals and things like that. So welcome, Wendy. Introduce yourself and we'll get started.
Hi, I'm Wendy Rose Bice. I like to tell the story of my name. And I was born Wendy Eileen Rose. And I always forgive all the Eileens out there, but I always hated my middle name. And when I found out that it was just a name my mother picked randomly when I got married, I loved my last name. And so I adopted Rose as my middle name. It's not hyphenated, but I do still use all three names. And it's significant to our conversation today because professionally, I was always Wendy Rose, which it was a memorable name. And I built, a reputation on that name, and started out in marketing and PR. I had a small PR firm called Rose Public Relations. But over the years, I began identifying more as Wendy Bice, and, so now I'm Wendy Rose Bice. But the reason I mention it is because even as Wendy Rose, in my early career as a young PR professional, I always dedicated a significant amount of my time to working with nonprofits. It's in my blood. It was how I was raised. And so whether it's as a board member or a volunteer or a paid consultant or a staff person, I've always integrated serving the community as part of my practice.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think there's some of us who are just born into that role, like born into that mission. And even now when we have the choice of what clients we take, right? When things are being thrown at us that we just can't take everyone, right? That happens every day. But I still like to hold on to a little bit of my soul and work with companies or nonprofits that I believe in the mission, and companies can have a mission.
Sure.
They're greater than their own. And even if it's a sales company, you can tell kind of the culture of the company by the things they do.
Right.
And not only by how they support their staff, but what they give back into the community.
Right.
And so that,
the whole, what started out in the early days as maybe sponsorships of nonprofit events, which led to corporate giving and a whole corporate community relations strategy, is now even more central to almost any successful organization's operations manual is what is their social responsibility? What is their public mission, and how does that tie to their business model? And I cannot think of a company, even if it's a minor element of it, that isn't doing that today, especially today.
Yeah, we hope.
Yeah.
And for anyone out there who isn't, it's time to sit down and spend a little time on that. Yeah, go ahead.
I believe, for those corporate or privately owned businesses, it's really quite rewarding to tie your philanthropy or your giving strategy to your purpose. Why are you in business? If you're in business baking cupcakes, then who can benefit in a sincere and wholeheartedly way from your expertise? And it may not be baking cupcakes, it may be teaching a community to bake bread, or providing materials so that home bakers can thrive. But there's always a way to tie your corporate purpose or your private enterprise purpose to a greater mission.
Right. So, until they were acquired, I worked for a company in Pontiac called Desai Solutions, and my boss was kind of known as the unofficial mayor of Pontiac, because there was never a conversation where he wasn't touting Pontiac, or
Right.
or he wasn't, saying there's an art thing, go to the art thing, or there's a derby day where kids build cars, that money is going back to the city of Pontiac,
Right.
their endeavors.
Right.
So it creates an interesting culture. It's also a great way to involve people in the corporate world by giving them a sense of choosing what they're doing.
Right.
And making that something. I mean, had there been a committee for what we're going to do with these funds, or how we're going to create this purpose, I think that would be a great place for a company to look to involve and create more of a cemented link to their employees.
Many organizations have employee-led community service and
Right.
community philanthropy programs.
It seems that it's the bigger companies. I think it's equally, if not more important, for the smaller companies to take that on as well.
Sure, and I think they do.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So you said you started in PR. So did you have like a regular PR job, or?
Yep. I started out. I started out as a young kid doing fundraising for the Arthritis Foundation.
Okay.
And that led to my next position with actually working with Florine Mark at Weight Watchers. And she was one of my most influential mentors and taught me probably more than anyone else I've worked with or for. And from there, I ended up at A&W Restaurants, being the head of their PR department. And then we were acquired and downsized, and marketing went from like a team of about 8 or 9 of us to 4 of us. And I had the opportunity to go half-time as their PR director and half-time as a field marketing manager, whatever we were called. And I got to choose from a list of states, and I had Washington State and Northern California as my region. So for a couple of years, so I would fly out there every couple months and meet with my franchisees and help them. And it was sad. I know that in one of the fires in the past 12 months, one of the A&W franchises that I worked with, I believe, burnt down. One of the last drive-ins in that area. But my favorite story to tell is, misstates us, but I got a call from one of my franchisees one day, a desperate, urgent phone call that they had just created this great deal to buy radio time. And could I fax him the tape?
Sure.
This was before there was anything digital, but so while at A&W, even in that role as their PR director, we launched a national fundraising program that came out of the same conversation is, what do we as a corporation want to do about our community responsibility and philanthropy, and how can we make that meaningful to all of the franchisees? And all of the franchisees were in small communities who worked very closely with their local high schools and junior highs, and, you know, putting the ads in the newspaper.
Right.
So we developed a program that was implementable and scalable depending on the size of the community to benefit high school music programs. And yeah, and it was a really tremendous program, and we rolled it out nationally. So the culture of always finding a way, even nonprofits, as a nonprofit, it's that same, you know, we're giving to the community, we're making our world a better place.
Right.
And we're strengthening our brand in doing so. So there's a lot of analogies between running a small business, running a small nonprofit, and so on, scaling up.
And I think in today's world, you used a word a few times that is so important in today's nonprofit. You said, I'm going to tell you a story about, let me tell you a story about. And that's really key, not only in the nonprofit world today, but there, you know, that's what drives sales. That's what drives all relationship building. And I always said, no matter what my position was, it was always about the relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. And the story.
$6 to acquire a new gift as opposed to $1 to repeat a gift in terms of what you're spending, whether it's on manpower or mailings or whatever you're doing.
Right.
So that relationship is key. You burn a donor, you burn something big. So, you know, one of the things, one story I always tell, or one thing I always say is that, you know, if you go to remember back in the day when we went to fundraisers, like actually, and walked in a door somewhere?
In the old days, yeah.
In the olden days, you know, 2019, the olden days. When you left somewhere, you never talked about if the food was good the next day. But if the food was bad, it's all you talked about.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, there's all these, and those are things that can really burn something up really quickly. Because it's certainly never the fault of the nonprofit.
Right.
But it's an interesting kind of, you know, sadly, we remember the things that are off as opposed to celebrating the things that are great.
Yeah.
So that leads to kind of how you help nonprofits today vision the great.
Right.
And so tell us a little more about what you're doing now, and we'll go from there. We'll keep talking. Yeah. Never a problem.
So I spent 10 years as the executive director of a nonprofit locally. And in those 10 years, I was able to kind of pull together all my marketing and PR experience, all my nonprofit experience, and bring it to the fore to help this organization grow. And so as my adult children moved on, and as the organization I was with was growing and looking to expand even further, I felt it was a good time to move on and work as a consultant. I really value diversity and wanted to be able to provide my services to a more diverse community, and also to bring my expertise to a more diverse community. So now I'm a consultant. I'm working with a handful of nonprofits, primarily in strategic planning. And so as a nonprofit, the IRS actually requires you to have a strategic plan. Right. And in its simplest form, a strategic plan is, in 5 years, we want to be serving 10,000 people. But in its more complex form, and why it's so valuable, is a strategic plan is really your roadmap to how you're going to get to providing services to 10,000 people. And a good strategic plan lays out goals and objectives that are both achievable, attainable, and aspirational over a period of time. And it's a tool for the board of directors to refer to and for any staff to refer to. My favorite example is when I was an executive director, I would have volunteers call me with great ideas.
Right.
So a great idea, if I'm trying to feed 10,000 people in the city of Pontiac, for example, and the great idea is to sponsor a group of children to learn how to play drums who live in Pontiac. It really has nothing to do with feeding them. It's a great idea. It's musical, it's arts and culture, but I could pull out my strategic plan, which the board had to approve, and say, it is a great idea, but it's not in our plan. And in order to be successful, we have to get to this plan. On the other hand, if that drum session also included vouchers for Kroger, and every participant got a $100 voucher, what a great idea all the way around. It integrates arts and culture, it integrates families, and it brings food to the table. Even though that's not in my strategic plan specifically, that would be something I would look at. So a strategic plan is a roadmap. It's a tool with which to say yes and a tool with which to say no, because there is not a nonprofit anywhere, I believe, that has so much extra time and money and staff that they could do whatever they want. The more focused you are, the more successful you'll be. So
I definitely have dealt with board members like that, and their ideas are great. And you're right, having that vision or that mission statement, it's something you can always go back to. And there's that, like, that four square chart that, is it critical? Is it interesting? Right. Does it fit our mission? And I forgot, figure out your fourth one. And I used to use that a lot with people because for them, it visualized that what they were saying was a good idea. It didn't take away from the value of the idea. It just, when are you getting it done? How does it match the critical and the mission driven? And so I think, I know, and one of the things I've done over the years is on an agenda, I've always put the mission statement on the top of an agenda.
That's I don't know if you do that. Tool.
Because it sets the tone of a meeting and so people read your mission statement and see as they're talking, it's just this visual it's a soft sell, right? It's just a reminder, this is why we're here tonight.
It's not even soft. It's
well, important. You're not reading it out loud. It's just you say at the top, if you make it just a statement at the beginning of the year, it's going to always be here. So it always reminds us what to do. Then you never have to mention it again, right? Yeah. You don't have to do any more work. When I was very young, right out of college, I worked for a nonprofit, and I look back now, I ran a 6-state youth group. Mm-hmm. So when I was 22, I was negotiating contracts with Marriott and hotel chains for, tens and tens of thousands of dollars. But the very first convention, I was only 5 years older than the oldest kids, and most of them were bigger than me, taller than me, the boys for sure. And I don't know, some kid swore at me, and I just said to him, use your language. If you swear at me, the conversation's going to be over. And the executive board group was sitting there. And I have to say, in 6 years, I never said anything again, because if a kid started to open his mouth, an older kid would say, oh, you can't do that to Pam. If you swear at Pam, it's going to be over. I never said it again.
Yeah.
Right. But it was something that followed me, I thought, to the good, because I was always about the words people use. And I used to say, it's not that there's not a time and place. And I can definitely be in that time and place, but it's not going to be here, and it's not going to be in front of someone of authority. So here's your lesson for life. And I actually had a Zoom call with some of the boys that I was we're close with. Okay, we'll forget how old they are now because I didn't get older. And they repeated the story back to me in the Zoom. That was something, 40, 30 years later, they still remember.
Yeah, that's cool.
It made me feel good, actually. All right. So what is like tell me about how you work with boards for how they're choosing. Do you work with boards for how they're choosing new board members? Do you work with people for the boards they're choosing? How do you work on that, kind of put that piece together?
So the board of directors, what many entrepreneurial nonprofit founders don't always consider is the vital and legal role that the board has to the nonprofit. And I've spent a lot of time coaching young nonprofits with this problem. So typically a nonprofit is founded by an impassioned entrepreneur who has a social mission and they want to run a nonprofit, and they get their 501c3. They have to have a board in order to get a 501c3. So they've got their mother and their neighbor and their uncle on the board, which is great. But you must have a board that's willing to ensure the integrity and the financial stability and the legal obligations of the nonprofit. So board development is essential to a nonprofit's survival and growth. And while the founding members can always have a role to play, as the nonprofit matures, it's important to add and keep a fresh roster of leadership coming up through the ranks. So part of strategic planning, there's many components. One of the components is board development. So I would work specifically with a nonprofit on that one element of their operation is, what is your board capable of? What do you need from your board? And how can we fill those vacancies? And finding board members isn't always easy because it's a responsibility. You're agreeing that this organization, its survival is partially dependent on your leadership as a board member. So you need board members that are willing to get their hands dirty. You need board members that are willing to call friends and ask for money. You need board members who have access to services that you may need. And you need board members who are worker bees and visionaries. It's all a matrix of the types of people on a healthy board that you would want. And a board can be as small as 3 people or as large as a dozen or 15. You don't want it too big.
Right.
But so, yeah, I do work with nonprofits on board development.
And I haven't decided if I'm saying yes, so don't tell them that yet. But I was just asked back on a national board, and it's new leadership, new executive, whatever. And the first thing I did was look through the bylaws and the information to make sure there was a director's and officer's liability.
Right.
Insurance,
yeah.
Right. And so I was talking with a friend. We were kind of asked back as a pair, and I said, well, we're a great pair. We just have to decide if this is what we want to do. We're great workers and we're great, we know we have value to the organization. We have to decide if we're willing to do this again. But I know that's important. That's got to be, those are things that are so often overlooked until you're in a crisis point and can undo an organization right?
Yeah.
So there are those like tick points off when forming an organization that you just have to be aware of. And it takes money to do that. I mean, you're right. Like, passion is really, really important, but passion doesn't pay the vendors at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah.
So that's interesting. And then so flip it on its head. If you're, I often see like on Indeed and different places that are looking for board members. And I always think it's interesting that they have to publicize they're looking for board members, that
Yeah.
they haven't, with their ranks, like brought those people up internally. So if someone's looking at a board, what advice would you give them?
Looking at joining a board?
Right. And they've been asked to be on a board and now they're making that decision.
Well, as you said, first of all, get a copy of the bylaws, make sure the organization has directors and officers liability insurance. But when you're looking at the bylaws, it's important to understand the role of the board. And then most organizations would have some kind of board packet or at least a letter of agreement. It is expected nationally that any board member provides a donation to the organization. It could be as little as $18, or some organizations require much larger gifts.
Right.
A lot of organizations have a give or a get. So that means, for example, if the minimum donation is $250 and you can't afford that, or feel that you could raise that through other means, that's your get. So you either give or you get $250. And how many board meetings a year are they? Where are they? In the old days, it could be that there was no electronic option. So you need to know where you're expected to be for those meetings. What other obligations are expected of you as a board member? Most small organizations expect their board members to take on at least one other volunteer role. It could be attending an event or chairing a committee, but really understand the scope of the ask and your obligation as a board member. But above and beyond all else, understand that your role as a board member is advice and counsel and ensuring that that organization thrives. And if you don't feel that you have the passion for that or the time for it, find another way to help them. And that's part of the reason why so many organizations are looking for board members.
Yeah.
Because they're more dependent on board members. The pool of volunteers has shrunk over the last decade. And so nonprofits rely more on board members to do some of the functions that some of their committees used to provide. And if they can't afford to fully staff, it has to be the board that's providing those services.
Right. Oh, I'm getting a little feedback. I was also going to add in, so what else do you think is like happening today with, we're sitting in the middle of this pandemic, so it's certainly changing, it's changing businesses, but it's making nonprofits in one direction all the more important, and in another direction the most free fall there is. So what are you looking at going forward? What do you think is going to be the recipe, I guess, for either making it through or success? Short term, long term, right?
Yeah, I think as every business entity has had to do, nonprofits have learned to pivot and reimagine how they operate. Some food programs, for example, they can't go virtual. They're still providing food and the need is greater than ever. But the way they operate as a team is changed, and as it has for all of us. And I think for many nonprofits, this idea of being more flexible in their methods of communicating and delivering will be a permanent change. For example, a reading program I'm involved with, they used to have in-group reading sessions led by a team leader. They could not do that, obviously. So they recruited a team of volunteers to deliver reading kits to their kids, and then a different team of volunteers to do one-on-one mentoring over Zoom, because the group mentoring wasn't working in their case. So I don't think they will ever go away. If a kid is sick, then they'll plug that kid into Zoom with a mentor, as opposed, even when we're back in person. As far as fundraising, it's been really challenging. Thankfully, all the measurements are showing that the trend of how much individuals are donating is not decreasing. So as a percent of the population, we're still donating. I can't remember, I think it's 59% in 2019 of US households donated some funds to a nonprofit. That trend is not decreasing.
Than I might have thought. That's great.
Religious institutions are the most frequently cited organizations that are given to. In recent years, obviously, racial justice and environment have ascended. I would expect that you're going to see an increase in the number of organizations that are receiving contributions for education. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think arts and culture has suffered among the worst. And that for many, many years was always among the strongest segment of nonprofit. So as arts and culture organizations go, again, they're innovating and they're trying to pivot and figure out how to deliver quality, mind-blowing experiences and raise funds at the same time.
It's kind of, I don't know why I've got an echo going, but do you hear the echo?
No.
Okay, good. So it's kind of like, I think the group I feel the worst for at the moment is teachers. Mm-hmm. Because, it's one thing, it's bad enough you have to make lesson plans. Some people apparently thrive on that. I don't know them. I don't know how that's possible, but apparently, because when I've taught, that was the worst part of the year.
Yeah.
But now, not only do you have to have lesson plans, you really have to have two sets, because tomorrow you may be at home or Zooming, and 3 days later you're back in the classroom, and so you have a different plan of attack. So, and as we know, teachers are always kind of left behind in the donation bit. I have this feeling that there may end up being a merging of some organizations as we move forward.
Sure.
That they can't make it on their own, but there's got to be either a synergy or another thing that's going on where they can partner better and do more for a community.
Yeah, that's been a long developing trend.
Yeah,
which I agree with you it'll be more obvious, I think, and more prevalent. And truthfully, I can't remember the number of nonprofit 501c3s there are in the United States. There are too many.
There are way too many.
Yeah, so some of the smaller ones should merge, just for the sake of saving their money, because it does cost money to run a nonprofit.
Right.
And to develop these strong alliances and synergies and collaborations.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you're an entrepreneur in the for-profit world, I always say there are two kinds of businesses these days. There's startups and acquired. Startup and sold. There's no one who's just in the business for the long run, which I find sad. Mm-hmm. But that kind of idea hasn't caught on in the nonprofit world, to do something so well that someone wants to bring you in as part of their mission. And maybe it means bringing in your team as well, and not affecting your staff, and because that's where people are always afraid. But there could be a way to make like more of a collective approach to how these smaller it would, first of all, it would get them more notice and more attention. So it's an interesting thing that will be happening as we move forward. It'll be interesting for people who have a passion to help. We'll watch as we move forward. So I just want to let people know that if they're interested in reaching Wendy, her website is WRB Consulting. So make sure you spell out the Bice, because there are other consulting groups with her initials, and it's a great website with a lovely picture on the front. And then, reach out. Do you have a newsletter? Or do you have anything that goes out that people can sign up for?
No,
Okay.
I should, but I don't.
Good. Maybe we can talk about that offline.
Yeah.
I'm the worst at sending my own out. You're probably not even on the list. But and then, are you interested in more connections on LinkedIn? Because that's really a platform. So if you would like to connect with Wendy, here's her LinkedIn profile, Wendy Rose Bice. And I would recommend, as I do for everyone, that you put a message along with your wish to connect, and make sure you mention that you met Wendy or virtually met Wendy through this spotlight on her small business. And you can put my name in there, and that would be great, so she knows and can connect with you quickly. I know that when I get a message, it pops to the top of my pile, and I will be much more likely to accept someone as opposed to tell them to follow me, which I do. And you know what? It gives me a little power to do that.
Yeah, so you're a great marketer.
Yeah, well, I try. Thank you. So I mean, and it's one of the places where we have talked about that we can interact, because you help create the vision and I can help create the marketing and the branding as the whole team puts forward the same message, because that's where I sit in my sweet spot, is making sure a team is all really reflecting the same, not even on board, but you can be on board or 80% or 100%, but when you're facing a donor, or you're facing outward, you have to be 100%. You have to leave the other things behind if you want the organization to be more important than your particular day. So worried about the 40-minute mark, which is kind of shocking, right?
Yeah,
so I know, I told you. And so I will again tell you, if you're watching later, and we'll be pushing this out, I have you can follow my YouTube channel, see other people I've interviewed. I've had it's really been fun. We got to I call this the ability to have pandemic positive. Something in the world that's making us feel a little better as we
that's a good one.
These dark months again. So I thank you, Wendy. I am sure we will connect, and one day again we will be at Leo's for lunch.
Leo's for lunch.
So I'll just say in closing that there was a little poll on on Facebook on a feed or something like, what junk food do you miss? And it had pizza and ice cream and all these things. And I wrote on the bottom, I miss Leo's for lunch.
Yeah, there's nothing like it.
There's nothing like it, So we shout out to them. We shout out to our mutual friend, Lori Bloom, who hopefully will be watching this at some point, who introduced us. And she was on one of my first spotlights. So it's fun to kind of connect. It gives me an opportunity to showcase other people. So I thank you today.
Thank you.
We will get in touch, and I'm looking forward to people's comments offline.
Me
Thanks
too.
so much.
And I'm happy to help anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. See you guys soon.